शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्यम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरम् योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विश्वमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युताव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम् Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a book which is a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on the subject of Atma Vichara between 1900 to 1950, and it has been compiled by our founder president, Sri Ramanacentre. We have been looking for the last few weeks on the question by a devotee on how to destroy the ego. We will again contemplate on that because that is the most important question, and by the grace of Bhagavan, and then have a 20-minute Atma Vichara session. Following that, we will be having our President Sharda Akka talking to us about Atma Vichara as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita by Ganapati Muni and his devotees, asking question to Bhagavan about Atma Vichara. And then finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. We will look at the question, the 19th question, which is from the 1936 to 1950, the part from 1936 to 1950. The devotee asks, how is one to destroy the ego? Bhagavan says, the ego is like one's shadow thrown on the ground. If one attempts to bury it, it will be foolish. The self is only one. If limited, it is the ego. If unlimited, it is infinite and is the reality. The bubbles are different from one another and numerous, but the ocean is only one. Similarly, the egos are many, whereas the self is one and only one. When told that you are not the ego, realize the reality. Why do you still identify yourself with the ego? It is like saying, don't think of the monkey while taking medicine. it is impossible. Similarly, when the reality is mentioned, why do you continue to meditate Shivoham or Aham Brahmasmi without tracking and understanding its significance? It is not enough to repeat the bare words or think of them. Reality is simply the loss of the ego. Destroy the ego by seeking its identity. Because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish and reality will shine forth by itself. This is the direct method, whereas all other methods are done only retaining the ego. In those paths, there arises so many doubts, and the eternal question remains to be tackled finally. But in this method, the final question is the only one, and it is raised from the very beginning. No sadhanas are necessary for engaging in this quest. So in the first paragraph, to the question by the devotee, how is one to destroy the ego? Bhagavan says, if we think that the ego is real and try to bury it, it would be as good as like somebody is trying to bury the shadow of oneself. No matter what we put to bury it, the shadow will appear on top of that. And therefore, if we think that the ego is real and there is a possibility for me to bury it, and who thinks it is the ego itself, and therefore if it goes on trying to bury it, it's as good as we have now superimposed a new identity and we looked at it as a new avatar of the ego itself. And therefore that entire effort is a simple foolishness, says Bhagavan here. So what does Bhagavan go about explaining? He says that the bubbles may be different from one another and numerous, but the ocean is only one. That means if you see many bubbles in the ocean, we could get carried away by its shape, size, and differences from one another. But if we really understand what a bubble is made of, we see that it is nothing but the ocean itself, the water itself. Similarly, even though whether it's one's ego or somebody else's ego, or whether we are seeing many egos, if we see what it is nothing but the self. It is all nothing but that being consciousness itself, says Bhagavan. Further, he goes on to give the trick about how to deal with this paradigm, that paradox, one would say that. And he goes on to say that when I are told that you are not the ego, that means don't look at any objective nature of the thing, but look at only the being consciousness through which we are only observing the object. Without the being consciousness, we can't become aware of anything, including a thought, including a gross form like a body, or many forms that we are seeing in the world. Without the being consciousness, we cannot become aware of anything at all. So he is saying that when told not to think about the ego, that means don't look at any form, any object, but only to see the being consciousness that is the underlying reality in every experience. Instead of that, why do you continue to see the ego, or why do you continue to see the object, asks Bhagavan here. And he says, like, I am saying don't see the object, and we are continuously seeing the object. Like he says, don't think of the monkey while taking the medicine. We only think of the monkey. That means even a thought that I will not see any objects from now on is again an object for whom? I. And that I is again an object for whom? Until we see the reality the underlying reality clearly and see that it is only with that oneself is the being consciousness, but instead of identifying with that, if I identify it any form, including any thought, then it is as good as I am thinking about the monkey while taking the medicine. The medicine is Atmanishtata, being in one's own self, natural nature. Instead of being that, I am thinking about the monkey. So that means I'm thinking, I'm using a thought which by very nature makes me not remain in my natural state, because the thought itself is an object for the being consciousness. So instead of being the medicine, we are thinking that the monkey is going to help me take the medicine better. It's like that. So Bhagavan says that similarly, when the reality is mentioned, why do you continue to meditate Shivoham or Aham Brahmasmi? He asks, because even that is a thought. And the meditator is also a person, an ego who is holding on to an identity or to a name and form. I, Dilip, will meditate every day from morning till evening on something like Shivoham or Aham Brahmasmi. All of them again is an object for that being consciousness. So without understanding, Bhagavan says, the significance of what he is trying to say, why are we simply repeating the bare words or thinking about what should I do? Because the one who wants to do something is again the ego entity. And therefore we are continuously holding on, given the reality, to the ego and thinking, what should I know, what should I do? Rather than simply turn our attention by inquiring, who am I? And get back to the being consciousness. We are holding on to the unreal identity and then further using that, trying to get back to our real nature. So that is what we are continuously doing. Therefore, any sadhana, Bhagavan says, is in more or less done this way. So he continues to explain that in the next paragraph. He says, reality is simply the loss of the ego. Very clearly, if there is no objects, then what remains is only the pure expanse of consciousness alone. There is no objects for the consciousness to perceive. The pure being consciousness alone remains if there is no object. That is the true destruction of the ego. So whenever there is an object, we should see to whom is this appearing and turn back to that pure being consciousness. And that is the real way to destroy all the objects that are rising. All the objects rising in the form of vasanas all the vasanas rising rather in the form of objects are destroyed, including the identity that I am an individual will only get destroyed by repeatedly turning our attention whenever an object becomes visible. To whom is this? Who am I? That is the way, says Bhagavan here. And he goes on to say a very important thing here. He says that because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish. This is the most important part. It is our attention or our attribute of reality. We think that I am Dilip, or I is real, or I am limited to this form. It is that reality that we are giving to this entity, which is actually, we are only the being consciousness. That is the reality. Instead of being that, when we lend that reality to a thought called I or I am Dilip, then it will appear very, very solid. It appears very real. So Bhagavan says, because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish. When we turn our attention back to ourselves, to the being consciousness repeatedly, and remain in that expanse of consciousness that we are, where there is no object, then the ego, since it's not an real thing. It was only an imaginary thought. It will vanish because it has no reality, says Bhagavan here. And Bhagavan says that this is the direct method, and all other methods are done giving ego a reality, giving that I am Dilip and I have to do some sadhana. Every other method is done with some identity, whereas this Atma Vichara alone takes us back to the self and frees us from all identity, frees us from all objects by questioning to whom is this, who am I? And therefore, in all other sadhana, the last question that would be asked when the ekagrata is completely achieved in all other sadhana, who is this one who is doing the sadhana, would be asked. Whereas Bhagavan says in this path, the final question is asked from the very beginning, and therefore that questioning is the only way of engaging in the self, not by any means of answer. Any means of answer is again an object, it's also a thought, and therefore it is as much an ego. So we should be very clear that when the question, who am I, is asked, we are only experiencing the being consciousness, the expanse of that consciousness, that Maha Mauna, and that by repeatedly diving into that ocean of silence, the ocean of self-silence, Bhagavan says that the ego, which is not an entity, will get destroyed. And that is the only thing to be done. And that is not a sadhana, because a sadhana is done by an ego entity. This is letting go the sadhaka and getting back to the real nature. And therefore, this is the direct path to the destruction of the ego, says Bhagavan here. The immense grace of Bhagavan with which we have come to this most direct path, which during the enquiry establishes in our real nature and let goes all the identity, wrong identity, or the ignorance that is there. The cause of all ignorance is also eliminated, and the reality which is naturally present is established again and again by Bhagavan. And in due course, Bhagavan says that the mind will be abiding in its purest nature, in its Swaswarupa, which is the expansion, the being consciousness, Anandam, which is its absolute real nature. The immense grace of Bhagavan with which we have come to this most direct path. For the next 20 minutes, no matter how many thoughts rises, no matter how many concepts rises, in whatever which way it rises, we should diligently understand that that is only an object rising for whom? Me. Therefore, diligently inquire, who am I? Because I is also an object to the being consciousness. Therefore, we should inquire, who am I? And try to get to the source of the I. Investigate what do I refer to as I, and turn our attention to the source. And by repeatedly doing so, Bhagavan assures that the mind will be abiding in its natural state, which is the self itself. The immense grace of Bhagavan, let us do Atma Vichara for the next 20 minutes. Namo Ramana. Over to Sharda Akka.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we have been meditating on the answers given by Bhagavan to different devotees on the subject of self-inquiry, and we have also been able to sit for practice of self-inquiry, and we continue the meditation on the teachings of Bhagavan, highlighting the relevance to the practice of self-inquiry. And this manana is based on the question and answers which have been recorded by Ganapati Muni in 18 chapters as the Ramana Gita. And we have done manana by Bhagavan's grace on 4 chapters. The first chapter talked about the importance of practice, because the whole text is only for the sake of practice. If practice were not needed, why do we need any text from Bhagavan? Why do we need any answers from Bhagavan? It is because of the need for practice, and for that practice we may need some clarifications, that this entire Gita has been bestowed upon us by Bhagavan. Then we went on to the second chapter, which was the Eka Shloki of Bhagavan. Hridaya Kuhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram. This was the essence, and Muni has said in another context that the entire Ramana Gita is only a commentary on that verse, on that chapter, in a way, if you may say, on that verse. So we have Hridaya Kuhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram. And the first word of that Eka Shloki is Hridaya. So the Hridaya is at the core of Bhagavan's teachings, the heart. And because of this, Vishwanatha Swami says, Harda Vidya Prakashakaya Namaha. He who has thrown light on or revealed the Hridaya Vidya, the science of the heart. So that was the core where Bhagavan gave the sthana, the Hridaya sthana, he indicated in that verse. But he had not gone in detail into that, into an explanation of that, and neither had the Muni asked him in that context. The Muni simply said, here Bhagavan has given the essence of all the Vedas, he has given the location of the spiritual heart, the seat of the Atman within us, and he has described the nature of the self, and he has shown the path to it. It's all just an Eka Shloki, and Muni did not comment in detail, because the Muni says the remaining chapters are all commentaries on that. Then we had the next chapter, the third chapter, which spoke about the paramount duty. Now we know there is the self, and we know the self has its seat in our heart within us. And we know the path to reach it also. After knowing all this, what becomes our paramount duty? Should we still wander around in the world of thoughts and experiences, thinking there is something important to be done over there? Or should we get back to our true nature and abide over there? Is there anything, any reason whatsoever for pursuing something other than self-knowledge? That question was posed in the third chapter by Daivarata, bringing our attention to the paramount duty being self-abidance alone. And further, in the fourth chapter, Ganapati Muni himself raised some doubts. He asked Bhagavan about certain concepts that are established. They are time-tested methods. The manana on Aham Brahmasmi and other concepts. Muni raised a question about that because that's already a given traditional path. Now the Muni has raised that question at that juncture because he wants to reveal further what is the new light that is thrown by Bhagavan on this area, on this sadhana. So he is asked already, what about the existing methods of doing manana on Aham Brahmasmi, etc. And Bhagavan said, yes, but they are all concepts only. If you say Aham Brahmasmi, as we had the manana even in the earlier part of today's satsang and in the previous satsang, it becomes a concept. If I think Aham Brahmasmi. In the talks also Bhagavan says, be still and know that I am God. Know and not think, he says. So one must know, one must have the anubhava, says Bhagavan. Bhagavan points out in that chapter that one has to have the anubhava again, he says. And then Bhagavan goes on to clarify the nature of the heart. In the previous chapter, in the 4th chapter, at the end, Muni asked, okay, you say that we have to have Atmanubhava, O Bhagavan. Can I have Atmanubhava with the mind? How am I to, in other words, if the mind cannot comprehend the self, how am I to experience the self? If Atmanubhava, self-experience alone is the answer, and the mind cannot reach there, how will I experience the self? And Bhagavan very graciously answered, saying, if the mind tries to find its own nature, if it turns upon itself instead of focusing on an object, if it focuses attention on itself, it dissolves into the self. It loses its separateness and it dissolves into the self. Now, how should the mind turn back to the self? Or how should the mind start paying attention to itself? For this, Bhagavan has given us 2 paths, one may say. One is the path of who am I, given to Shiva Prakasham Pillai, and the other, the path of whence am I, given to Gambiram Sheshayar and Ganapati Muni also. Find out from where the I thought arises and merge at its source. This was the Upadesha given to Ganapati Muni, which completely awakened him to the truth that was elusive. The Atmanubhava, which had been elusive, despite having several anubhavas of the highest spiritual order, he had recognized that Atmanubhava he did not have. At that point of time, he had great spiritual experiences and he felt that that Atmanubhava could happen only by the Sadguru Kataksha. So he repeatedly, and even in the previous chapter, he emphasizes that it is the Guru Kataksha, it's the Guru's grace which cleanses us, the Guru's glance which cleanses us. It's the Guru's glance which enables us to understand his words and his answers and his teachings and his path and get back to the self. So now the teaching was given to turn back to the source. So what is that source? That source is being called Hridayam by Bhagavan, and it is said in that word Hridayam is there in the scriptures also. So in chapter 5, we find that Bhagavan of his own accord, suo moto it is said, he is speaking. In all the other chapters, there are questions posed to Bhagavan. Here Muni says, Pragupte Deshamema pragukte deshta me mase navame divase nishi upanyasita vang samyak uddishya hridayam munihi. On the 9th of August 1970, Bhagavan spoke exhaustively about the nature of the heart. And so what does Bhagavan say about the heart? Hridayam nirgacchati yata sarva vrittayo dehadharinam hridayam tat samakhyatam bhavana kriti varnanam. Bhagavan says the heart is that source. If one is embodied, if one thinks I am a so and so, I have a body, I have this body, if one is embodied, dehadharinam, what happens? One has thoughts. Plenty of thoughts are there. This is our experience. And Bhagavan says that from which all the thoughts arise. All the thoughts arise. That from which all the thoughts arise is called the heart. Nirgachanti yatas sarva vrittir. Sarva vrittayoho. All the vrittis are coming out from that. Yataha. Okay, what is that? Hridayam tat samakhyatam. Its name is heart. It is called heart. But one cannot describe it. Bhagavan is saying, bhavana kriti varnanam. Any description of it becomes a concept. This is the first statement Bhagavan is making about the heart. Why? Because he is going to make some further statements about it. He is warning us that we must actually listen to his statements and understand that as statements, when we take them as statements, they will be only concepts for us until we experience the truth of it. So don't hold on to it as a concept. This warning Bhagavan is giving even about the statements that he is about to make. He is going to make some statements about the heart. But he says all these statements will remain as concepts. They are only concepts if you look at them as the words, as the statements. But this was a point which Vishwanatha Swami told me. Vishwanatha Swami was the one who connected me to the concept of the Hridaya. When I went to him seeking mantra sadhana and he gave me the mantra sadhana, he told me, do the mantra sadhana looking at the mantra arising and subsiding in the location which Bhagavan has given for the spiritual heart. Bhagavan has indicated a location which is a little to the right of the center of our chest. So this location, Vishwanatha Swami said, you pay attention to the mantra rising and subsiding there. Rising from there, subsiding there. And then he told me, even then and there he told me, when you do so, it will be a concept for you. It is a concept only. So he made it very clear because Bhagavan was always clear that one must go to the Anubhava. But he said, this concept will be a helpful concept in your sadhana. That's why Bhagavan has allowed, even in Ulladinarpada, he says we can do Soham Vichara also until we have attachment to the body. After that, it will fall away on its own. So this Aham Brahmasmiti, all these vrittis, all these concepts, we must understand they are supports, they are aids, but they are not the truth. One should not get into the idea that any concept is the truth. So Bhagavan is giving this indication before he starts explaining what the spiritual heart is. And then he goes on to say, Aham vrittis samastanam vrittinam moolam uchyate. This is a very typical concept of Bhagavan, the core teaching, one of the core teachings of Bhagavan, where he says all thoughts. Now, I had told you, all thoughts are springing from the heart. Now, how do they spring from the heart? There is one middleman. There is one medium which first grasps and then allows us to see in one sense. That is to say, he says, Aham vrittis samastanam vrittinam moolam uchyate. I have told you that the heart is the source. How is the heart the source? The I thought is the source of all the thoughts. And then, nirgacchati yatoham dhihi hridayam tat samakhyatah hridayam tat samasatah. Now, from where does the I arise and where to does the I go? That is the heart. So how is the process? The process is that thoughts are there, thoughts are springing from the I thought, and thoughts will subside into the I, and the I in turn will subside into the heart. The I rises from the heart, and the I rising, all the thoughts will arise. In Ashtakam, Bhagavan says, if the I is not there, there won't be any thought. When the I rises, other thoughts arise. Therefore, when thoughts arise, don't worry about the thoughts, but ask for whom and from where does this I arise, and get back to the source. So Bhagavan is telling us again over here that the thoughts, the entire thought world, which seems so large, so difficult to tackle, so powerful, it's all dependent on the I thought. It's all springing only from the I thought. And the I thought, which seems so powerful, then if all the thoughts are coming from the I thought, how powerful must this I be? But the I is not powerful because it's also having a source. Its source is the heart. So Bhagavan is turning our attention again in the very beginning of the Hridaya Vidya chapter. Bhagavan establishes his own path of self-inquiry. First, he says, I will tell you about the heart, but don't make it a concept. Because if you make it a concept, it will be one more thought. And what is a thought? A thought is something which is dependent on the I thought. And what is the I thought? The I thought is actually springing from the heart. So by a concept, you cannot comprehend the heart. But you can go back to it. You can go back to it. And then he will continue to explain what the heart is in his definition, what the heart is not, and how the heart functions, how the mind functions in relation to the heart, how exactly, what is the process which happens. This Bhagavan explains for our understanding of the supremacy of the heart. In order that we may understand that, Bhagavan goes on to explain in this chapter. We will look at it in the further satsangs. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana.
Thank you, God. Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyor Bimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihiram Hridi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami. Namo Ramana. Thank you. Thank you.
Namo Ramana. Thank you, Dilip.